It looks spicy. It smells really spicy. Oh my god, this is delicious. Absolutely delicious.
Delicious. It's comforting, cozy, full of all those fall flavors, and so easy too. I hope you get a chance to make this recipe.
Steam hissed from empty pots across America. Families were losing everything, yet a single handful of vegetables could feed 8 people for days. There's a tattered cookbook buried in my grandmother's trunk, pages stained with decades of desperate cooking. Inside, 25 recipes that turned scraps into survival, hunger into hope. Let's uncover the Depression kitchen that kept America alive. Hoover Stew, the president's unintended legacy. When Herbert Hoover took office in 1929, he never imagined his name would become synonymous with survival cooking. Hoover Stew wasn't named to honor the president. It was bitter irony from families struggling to eat. This simple dish combined macaroni, canned tomatoes, hot dogs, and whatever vegetables could be found, all simmered together in one pot. The beauty of Hoover Stew lay in its complete adaptability, making it the perfect recipe for families who never knew what ingredients they'd have from day to day. Families would start with a base of pasta and tomatoes, then add whatever they had: corn, peas, carrots, or beans. The dish was named after President Hoover, who took office right before the financial crash of 1929, and was mostly enjoyed by families in shanty towns called Hoovervilles. A 16-ounce box of macaroni could feed a family of 6 when stretched with vegetables and water. The vegetables weren't just filler, they provided essential vitamins that prevented malnutrition during a time when fresh produce was often unaffordable. The cooking process was crucial for developing flavor from simple ingredients. Families would brown any available meat first, then add vegetables in order of cooking time. Root vegetables like potatoes and turnips went in early, while leafy greens were added near the end. The stew could be stretched with additional water or thickened with extra pasta, depending on how many mouths needed feeding. Smart cooks discovered that letting the stew simmer slowly developed deeper flavors, transforming humble ingredients into something that actually tasted good. The psychological impact of this dish cannot be understated. During a time when President Hoover represented failed economic policies to many Americans, naming their survival meal after him was both criticism and dark humor. The stew became a symbol of resilience, families taking control of their own survival when government failed them. Mothers would teach their children the recipe, passing down both cooking skills and the story of how Americans endured their darkest economic hour. The dish required no special equipment, just a single pot and whatever ingredients could be scrounged together, making it accessible to even the poorest families living in cardboard shacks. Even today, this one-pot meal remains a testament to American ingenuity during the darkest economic times. The recipe proved that with creativity and determination, families could create satisfying meals from whatever was available, turning scarcity into abundance through sheer willpower and kitchen wisdom. Depression era, vegetable soup, the weekly lifeline. Every Friday night during the 1930s, a familiar aroma filled Depression-era kitchens across America, the smell of vegetable soup simmering on the stove. This soup was a weekly menu item during the 1930s and beyond, frugal, filling, and containing only simple ingredients that most families could somehow manage to obtain. The recipe varied by region and season, but the core remained the same. Whatever vegetables were available, combined with water or a precious bit of broth, transformed into a meal that could sustain a family through another week of hardship. Families would use whatever was left over from the week: potatoes, cabbage, corn, probably some milk and butter if they had a cow, with lots of root vegetables like beets, turnips, and rutabaga and their greens. The soup's genius lay in its complete flexibility and forgiving nature. In summer, families used tomatoes, corn, and fresh beans from their victory gardens. Winter soups featured stored root vegetables and preserved cabbage that had been carefully rationed throughout the cold months. The basic recipe contained one 14-ounce can of tomato puree, one 14-ounce can of peas, potatoes, onions, and seasonings, cooked for about an hour and a half on medium heat. The long cooking time was essential for developing flavor and breaking down tough vegetables. Families would stir occasionally and add small amounts of water if the mixture became too thick, constantly adjusting based on what they had available. This wasn't just sustenance. It was survival strategy. The soup could be stretched with water to feed unexpected guests, or thickened with potatoes to create a more filling meal. Families would save vegetable scraps throughout the week, creating a continuous cycle of nourishment from what others might throw away. The soup represented the Depression-era mindset of waste nothing, want nothing, turning every scrap into survival. The preparation ritual became as important as the meal itself. Children learned to help by peeling vegetables, and mothers taught daughters the art of seasoning with whatever herbs could be grown or foraged. The soup pot became a symbol of hope. As long as there was something simmering on the stove, the family would survive another day. Even bones from previous meals were saved and added for extra nutrition and flavor, demonstrating the complete utilization of every food resource available during those desperate times. Navy bean soup, the sailor's secret. Navy bean soup became a Depression-era staple because beans were a commodity you did not survive without in the 30s. This protein-packed soup earned its name from the United States Navy, where it sustained sailors on long voyages across treacherous seas. During the Depression, families adopted this maritime tradition for their own survival, discovering that this simple soup could provide the protein and calories needed to sustain hard-working families when meat was an unaffordable luxury. This navy bean soup is hearty and tasty, with ham providing saltiness and great flavor when available. The recipe's brilliance lay in its simplicity. Dried navy beans, water, and whatever vegetables could be added. Families would soak beans overnight in precious water, then simmer them slowly with onions, carrots, and celery. The soup provides 244 calories per cup, with 18 grams of protein and 42 grams of carbohydrates. Nutrition that was crucial for families doing physical labor to survive. Those fortunate enough to have a ham bone would add it for flavor, creating a rich broth that made the beans taste almost luxurious. But even without meat, the beans provided essential amino acids that growing children needed. The key was patience. Beans needed to cook slowly for hours, developing creamy texture and rich flavor. Smart cooks would add vegetables at different stages, keeping harder vegetables like carrots intact, while allowing softer ones to break down and thicken the soup. The soup improved with time. Leftover portions would thicken overnight, becoming even more substantial the next day. Families discovered that a single pound of navy beans could create multiple meals, making this soup an economic miracle during the hardest times. The recipe proved that plant-based proteins could sustain families just as well as expensive meat, a lesson that helped countless families survive the Depression's worst years. The cultural significance of this soup extended beyond nutrition. Navy bean soup connected landlocked families to America's maritime heritage, reminding them that sailors had survived on simple fare for centuries. The soup became a symbol of American resilience. If it was good enough for the Navy, it was good enough for Depression-era families. Children learned to appreciate the humble bean, understanding that this simple legume could mean the difference between hunger and satisfaction during the nation's most challenging economic period. Potato soup, the 5-ingredient miracle. This old-fashioned potato soup only requires 5 ingredients: potatoes, milk, butter, salt, and pepper. When families had nothing else in their pantries, they could usually find potatoes and a bit of milk. This simple soup became a Depression-era staple because it transformed the cheapest ingredients into satisfying meals that could feed a family for days. The recipe represents the ultimate in Depression-era cooking, maximum nutrition and comfort from minimal resources, proving that the most humble ingredients could create the most satisfying results. The cooking process started with butter, sweet yellow onion, white potatoes cubed into uniform pieces, and whole milk to cover the vegetables, simmered until potatoes were fork tender. The preparation required patience and careful attention to prevent the milk from curdling. Families would sauté onions in precious butter until they became golden and sweet, then add cubed potatoes and continue cooking until they started to soften slightly, building layers of flavor from the very beginning. Great-Grandma Agnes used to make this soup regularly, and families could substitute water for milk if necessary to make it even more economical. The key was understanding that the potato starch would naturally thicken the soup, creating richness without expensive ingredients. Smart cooks learned to mash some potatoes while leaving others whole, creating a soup with varied texture that made it feel more substantial and interesting than its simple ingredients would suggest. The soup could be stretched further by adding water or extended with other vegetables like carrots or celery when available. Some families would add a bit of flour to thicken the soup even more, creating a meal that was filling enough to satisfy hungry workers. The beauty of this recipe lay in its complete forgiveness. It was almost impossible to ruin, and even novice cooks could create something delicious and nourishing. The psychological comfort provided by this soup was as important as its nutritional value. The creamy texture and familiar flavors reminded families of better times, providing emotional sustenance along with physical nourishment. Even today, this basic recipe proves that the most satisfying meals often come from the simplest ingredients, and that comfort food doesn't require expensive or exotic components to nourish both body and soul during difficult times. Cabbage and dumplings, the Amish inheritance. Cabbage and dumplings became a staple in Amish households and was especially important during the Great Depression when every ingredient had to count toward family survival. This humble dish represented the ultimate in Depression-era cooking, filling, nutritious, and made from ingredients most families could afford even in the worst times. The recipe embodied the Amish philosophy of simplicity and resourcefulness, proving that the most satisfying meals often came from the most basic ingredients available to struggling families. The recipe is as basic as it gets. Cabbage and onions are fried in a cast-iron pan and paired with homemade egg and flour dumplings. The preparation was simple, but required patience and understanding of how to develop flavor from humble ingredients. Families would slowly fry cabbage until it caramelized, developing natural sweetness that transformed this often bitter vegetable into something delicious and comforting that children would actually want to eat. The dumplings were made from flour, eggs, and water, ingredients that were usually available even in the poorest households during the Depression. The dough was mixed just enough to come together, then dropped into the cabbage mixture to cook. This cabbage and noodle dish is made with buttery noodles and crispy pan-fried cabbage, requiring only 4 ingredients total. The technique of slow cooking the cabbage was crucial. It eliminated the vegetable's natural bitterness while creating a sweet caramelized base that absorbed the dumpling's flavor. The dish provided both carbohydrates and vegetables in one pot, making it a complete meal that could sustain a family through hard times without requiring multiple courses or expensive ingredients. Families learned that adding a bit of bacon fat, when available, would enhance the flavor dramatically. But even without meat, the dish was satisfying and nutritious. The dumplings absorbed the cabbage's flavors, creating a cohesive meal that satisfied both hunger and nutritional needs. This recipe proved that German and Amish cooking traditions could provide crucial sustenance during America's hardest times, showing how immigrant food wisdom and traditional cooking methods helped families survive the Depression while maintaining cultural connections to their heritage and ancestral cooking knowledge that had sustained previous generations through their own hardships. Dandelion salad, nature's free pharmacy. Dandelions are a nutrient-rich superfood, and Depression-era families would dig them right out of their backyards by the roots when money was too scarce to buy vegetables from stores. When grocery money was non-existent, families turned to their yards for nutrition, discovering that what others considered weeds were actually nutritional powerhouses that could provide essential vitamins and minerals. Many families picked wild dandelions and served them as salad because they were free and good for you, a combination that was absolutely essential during the Depression years. This wasn't just about saving money. Dandelions provided more vitamins than many store-bought vegetables that families couldn't afford anyway. America's Cookbook from 1937 recommended using dandelion greens in various recipes, including salads, recognizing their exceptional nutritional value. The preparation required knowledge that mothers carefully passed to daughters, ensuring that families could identify and prepare wild foods safely without poisoning themselves or their children. Young dandelion leaves were best, picked before the flowers appeared when they were most tender and least bitter. The harvesting process was labor-intensive, but rewarding for families who had no other source of fresh vegetables. Families would dig dandelions right out of their backyards by the roots, then remove the flowers and dead leaves before washing them rigorously to remove all dirt and insects that might contaminate the food. The bitter taste was often balanced with other ingredients like hard-boiled eggs when available, or simply dressed with vinegar and a bit of precious oil. Some families would add wild onions or other foraged greens to create more complex flavors and increase the nutritional value of their salads. This salad can be made with items that grow in your backyard, turning commonly found weeds into a nutritious meal that provided essential vitamins A, C, and K. Smart families recognized that dandelions were available from early spring through fall, providing a consistent source of vitamins when other vegetables were scarce or unaffordable. The greens were especially valuable in early spring when stored vegetables were running low and fresh produce hadn't yet become available in gardens. The practice of eating dandelion salad connected families to the land and taught children valuable lessons about finding nutrition in unexpected places during desperate times. Buttermilk soup. The Unexpected Comfort. The Most for Your Money cookbook, published in 1938, offered recipes for buttermilk soup, noting that buttermilk should sell for less than half the price of fresh milk. This unusual soup became popular during the Depression because buttermilk was significantly cheaper than regular milk and provided essential nutrients that growing families desperately needed. The cookbook recognized that families needed creative ways to get dairy nutrition without paying premium prices for fresh milk that was often beyond their financial reach. The first recipe involved adding raisins, nutmeg, sugar, salt, and lemon peel to a quart of buttermilk, bringing it to a boil, then adding rice and covering to boil slowly until rice is soft. The soup was both economical and nutritious, providing protein and carbohydrates in one bowl that could sustain families through long days of work. Families discovered that buttermilk's tangy flavor paired surprisingly well with sweet additions like raisins or sugar, creating a comforting meal that satisfied both hunger and the desire for something special. The cookbook noted this as one of the cheapest and most nutritious soups we know, besides being a novel change from the usual run of soups. The preparation required careful temperature control to prevent the buttermilk from curdling, which families learned through trial and error. The key was heating the buttermilk slowly and stirring constantly to maintain smooth texture. Some families would add a bit of flour to help stabilize the mixture and prevent separation. Variations of the soup included different spices and additions based on what was available in each household. Some families served it hot during winter months, while others enjoyed it cold during summer, creating a refreshing meal when fuel for cooking was scarce and expensive. The soup represented Depression-era innovation, taking an ingredient that was considered a byproduct of butter making and transforming it into proper sustenance that could nourish families. This recipe showed how Depression-era families could find nutrition and comfort in unexpected places, proving that creativity and resourcefulness could turn even the most unlikely ingredients into satisfying meals that provided both physical nourishment and emotional comfort during America's most challenging economic period. For buttermilk soup, noting that buttermilk should sell for less than half the price of fresh milk. This unusual soup became popular during the Depression because buttermilk was significantly cheaper than regular milk and provided essential nutrients that growing families needed. The cookbook recognized that families needed creative ways to get dairy nutrition without paying premium prices for fresh milk. This recipe showed how Depression-era families could find nutrition and comfort in unexpected places, proving that creativity and resourcefulness could turn even the most unlikely ingredients into satisfying meals. Egg drop soup, the protein stretcher. Clara's Depression egg drop soup included browned potatoes and onions, a simple salted water broth, and scrambled eggs. This wasn't the Chinese restaurant version, but American survival cooking at its finest. This soup represented the Depression-era art of protein stretching, showing how families could make expensive eggs feed more people by combining them with filling vegetables and creating a substantial broth that satisfied hunger while providing essential nutrition that growing children and working adults desperately needed. The soup started with peeled and diced potatoes and onions, browned in a pot with whatever fat was available, then covered with water to make broth. The method was crucial for creating flavor from the simplest ingredients available to struggling families. Families would brown the vegetables first, developing deep, caramelized flavors that formed the foundation of the soup. This browning step was essential. It created the difference between survival food and actually satisfying meals that families could enjoy rather than simply endure. While the mixture was boiling, 2 eggs were cracked into the pot and stirred until scrambled. Then 2 more eggs were added so the yolk would harden, creating different textures within the soup. This technique stretched expensive eggs into a filling meal that could feed an entire family. The combination of soft scrambled eggs and firmer yolk pieces created textural interest that made the simple soup more satisfying and substantial than its humble ingredients would suggest. The soup could be served over toast to make it even more filling, transforming it from a light meal into something that could sustain hard-working family members through long days of physical labor. Families learned that the browning step was absolutely essential. It created rich, complex flavors that made simple ingredients taste like a proper meal, rather than just survival food that families had to choke down. Even with minimal ingredients, this soup provided complete proteins and enough calories to sustain families through long days of physical labor, proving that creativity and proper technique could transform the humblest ingredients into proper nourishment. The recipe became a symbol of Depression-era ingenuity, making something from almost nothing while ensuring that every family member received adequate nutrition to survive the economic crisis. Bread and butter pickles. The summer solution. At the end of summer during the Great Depression, excess cucumber crops were sliced, salted, pickled, and put up in jars for the cold, lean months ahead when fresh vegetables would be unavailable. These pickles became known as bread and butter pickles because they were often the only accompaniment to plain bread during the hardest times. The Great Depression is where bread and butter pickles are said to have gotten their name. They were served with plain bread and butter as a complete snack or light meal. The preservation process was simple but crucial for winter survival. Families would slice cucumbers and onions thin, salt them overnight to draw out moisture, then pack them in jars with vinegar, sugar, and spices. The salt drew out water that would otherwise cause spoilage, while the vinegar and sugar created an environment that preserved the vegetables for months. This technique allowed families to enjoy vegetables throughout winter when fresh produce was completely unavailable. These sweet, crunchy coins provided a wonderful break from what must have been a fairly flavorless existence during the Depression's worst years. The pickles provided necessary vitamins, particularly vitamin C, during winter months when fresh vegetables were unavailable and scurvy was a real concern. The sweet-sour flavor combination also satisfied cravings for something special during times when treats were rare. Smart families would make large batches when cucumbers were abundant and cheap, often trading with neighbors to ensure everyone had enough preserved vegetables for winter. The vinegar and sugar combination created a preserve that could last months without refrigeration, making these pickles a cornerstone of Depression-era food storage. The recipe required no special equipment, just jars, vinegar, sugar, and patience. This preservation technique represented the Depression-era understanding that summer's abundance had to be carefully managed to provide nutrition throughout the long winter months ahead. Boom creamed chipped beef, the breakfast of necessity. Creamed chipped beef on toast, also called SOS. Save our stomachs, was made with dried beef rehydrated in a roux of butter, flour, and milk, then served over toast. This dish became a Depression staple because dried beef was more affordable than fresh meat and could be stored without refrigeration for months in root cellars or pantries. The technique of creating a creamy sauce from simple ingredients transformed preserved meat into something that felt like a proper meal rather than just survival food that families had to endure. Dried beef was one of the most widely available meats during the Great Depression, making meals like creamed chipped beef on toast common staples in households across America. The preparation required skill in making a proper roux, which families learned through necessity and practice. The process began with melting butter in a pan, then adding flour and cooking the mixture until it formed a smooth paste without lumps. This roux was the foundation of the dish, providing both thickening and richness to the final sauce. The technique required patience and constant stirring to prevent lumps from forming and ruining the sauce. Families would gradually add milk to the roux, whisking constantly to create a smooth, creamy sauce that would coat the beef properly. The dried beef was then added and rehydrated in the hot sauce, becoming tender and flavorful through the cooking process. The entire mixture was served over toast, which absorbed the sauce and made the dish more filling and substantial. This technique transformed inexpensive ingredients into a protein-rich meal that could sustain families through hard physical work and long days of labor. The dish provided both protein and carbohydrates, essential for families doing manual labor to survive economically. The creamy sauce made even tough dried beef palatable and satisfying, proving that proper technique could elevate humble ingredients into something truly comforting and nourishing. Even today, this recipe remains popular in some regions, proving that necessity can create enduring comfort food that transcends its humble origins and difficult circumstances. The dish represents Depression-era ingenuity, taking preserved meat and creating something that felt special and satisfying, despite being born from economic desperation and the need to make cheap ingredients taste good. Mulligan Stew, the community pot. Mulligan stew was reportedly first created by the homeless population during the Depression and was a total mix of whatever food the neighborhood had available for sharing. This wasn't just a recipe. It was a symbol of community survival and the American spirit of pulling together during the hardest times in the nation's history. The homeless would come together around a campfire and throw together their bits and pieces in a big pot to make Mulligan stew, creating something greater than the sum of its parts through cooperation and shared resources. The beauty of Mulligan stew lay in its complete flexibility and democratic nature that welcomed any contribution. There was no fixed recipe because it depended entirely on what people could contribute from their meager supplies. The stew typically comprised potatoes, carrots, and whatever meat could be found, but the exact ingredients varied based on what was available each day. Sometimes families would contribute a can of vegetables, others might add a precious piece of meat, and still others would provide potatoes or onions from their gardens. The cooking process was as important as the ingredients themselves in creating a successful communal meal. Families would brown any available meat first, building a foundation of flavor before adding vegetables in stages. Root vegetables went in early because they took longer to cook, while leafy greens were added near the end to prevent them from becoming mushy and unappetizing. The stew would simmer for hours, allowing all the flavors to meld together and creating something that was truly satisfying. The stew could feed many people and actually improved with time as flavors developed and intensified throughout the cooking process. Families discovered that letting the stew cook slowly over low heat created deep, complex flavors that made even the simplest ingredients taste rich and satisfying. The dish represented the collaborative spirit that helped Americans survive the Depression, sharing resources, knowledge, and hope during the darkest economic times. This recipe showed that when people work together and share what little they have, they can create something beautiful and nourishing that sustains both body and spirit during the darkest times, proving that community cooperation could overcome individual hardship through collective strength and mutual support. Mock apple pie, the Ritz Cracker miracle. Mock apple pie was made with Ritz crackers as an apple filling alternative when real apples were too expensive or simply unavailable in most stores. This dessert became legendary during the Depression because it satisfied sweet cravings without costly ingredients, proving that creativity and basic chemistry could create the impossible. The recipe involved mixing sugar, water, and cream of tartar, boiling for 5 minutes, then adding crumbled crackers, cinnamon, and butter to create a filling that remarkably resembled cooked apples in both texture and taste. The Settlement Cookbook from 1903, revised through the 1930s, contained early versions of mock apple pie, showing that this technique had been refined over decades of economic hardship and experimentation. Families discovered that the cream of tartar and crackers created the perfect illusion of apple texture through a chemical reaction that broke down the crackers while maintaining their structure. The acid in the cream of tartar mimicked the natural tartness of apples, while the crackers provided the tender, crisp texture that made the deception complete and convincing. The mixture was poured into pie crust and baked for 30 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a dessert that looked and tasted remarkably like real apple pie. The sugar syrup soaked into the crackers, creating the sweet tart flavor that was so reminiscent of cooked apples that many people couldn't tell the difference. Families would often add cinnamon and nutmeg to enhance the apple illusion, creating a dessert that satisfied both physical hunger and emotional needs for familiar comfort foods. This recipe proved that Depression-era cooks were chemists as much as chefs, understanding how ingredients interacted to create new textures and flavors through scientific principles. The pie satisfied both the desire for something sweet and the psychological need for familiar comfort foods during uncertain times, when traditional ingredients were unavailable. The recipe became so popular that it was featured in advertisements and cookbooks, showing how necessity could create innovations that outlasted their desperate origins. The success of mock apple pie proved that with creativity and understanding of food science, families could create treats that brought joy even during the hardest times, demonstrating that the human spirit could find ways to create happiness and satisfaction even when faced with seemingly impossible circumstances and severe economic limitations. Bologna casserole, the protein solution. When meat was too expensive during the Depression, people turned to Bologna to get the protein they needed, making Bologna casseroles popular in households across America where fresh meat was completely unaffordable. This dish represented the democratization of protein, making affordable processed meat feed an entire family when fresh meat was completely out of reach financially. The casserole was made with bacon, peppers, onion, canned pork and beans, canned chili and beans, cheddar cheese, and bologna, creating a hearty meal that provided both protein and satisfaction, despite using processed ingredients. The preparation involved layering flavors to create a satisfying meal that transcended its humble ingredients and basic preparation methods. Families would brown the bologna first, building flavor through the Maillard reaction before adding other ingredients. This browning step was crucial. It transformed the processed meat into something that actually tasted good rather than just providing basic nutrition. The bologna would develop crispy edges and concentrated flavor that enhanced the entire dish significantly. This casserole recipe was hearty and had flavor, significant praise for Depression-era meals that were often bland and focused purely on survival rather than enjoyment. The combination of beans provided fiber and additional protein, while the vegetables added vitamins and texture that made the dish more satisfying. The dish could be stretched with additional beans or vegetables, making it adaptable to family size and available ingredients in the pantry. The combination of beans and processed meat provided complete proteins, essential for growing children and adults doing physical labor to survive economically. The casserole could be assembled ahead of time and baked when needed, making it perfect for busy families trying to manage work and household responsibilities. The cheese on top created a golden, appealing surface that made the dish look special, despite its humble ingredients and simple preparation. This casserole proved that creativity could transform even the most basic processed meats into satisfying family meals that provided both nutrition and comfort during uncertain times. The recipe showed how Depression-era families could create filling, tasty meals from whatever was available, proving that determination and cooking skill could overcome economic limitations and create family satisfaction even during the hardest times. Spaghetti with carrots and white sauce, Eleanor Roosevelt's recommendation. Eleanor Roosevelt recommended and promoted spaghetti with boiled carrots and white sauce as part of home economics education during the Great Depression. This dish represented official government guidance on stretching food budgets while maintaining nutrition, showing how the First Lady tried to help American families survive the economic crisis. The recipe consisted of spaghetti cooked until mushy, about 25 minutes, and mixed with boiled carrots, then covered with white sauce and baked into a casserole. The white sauce was crucial for binding the ingredients together and creating a cohesive meal. The sauce was made with milk, flour, salt, and either butter or margarine, with maybe a little pepper for flavor. This white sauce was poured over everything for budget meals during the Depression, creating a unified dish that was filling and provided both carbohydrates and vegetables. The sauce helped mask the overcooked texture of the pasta and vegetables while adding richness and calories. The ingredients were mixed in a baking tray and baked until the top was golden, creating a thick, mushy, bland casserole that prioritized nutrition over flavor. While not flavorful by modern standards, this dish provided carbohydrates from the pasta and vitamins from the carrots at minimal cost. The long cooking time was intentional. It created a soft texture that was easy to digest and made the meal feel more substantial. The recipe showed how government nutritionists tried to help families maintain health during economic hardship leadership while working within severe budget constraints. The dish could be made in large batches and reheated, making it practical for busy families. The combination of pasta and vegetables provided sustained energy that was essential for families doing physical labor to survive. Even today, this combination demonstrates how vegetables can be incorporated into pasta dishes to increase nutritional value and volume while keeping costs low. Cornbread and milk, the simple comfort. Cornbread and milk was a common Depression-era dish, often eaten for breakfast or dinner when nothing else was available in the household. This simple combination provided both comfort and nutrition when resources were extremely limited, showing how families could create satisfying meals from the most basic ingredients. The preparation was beautifully simple. Crumble cornbread into a bowl, pour milk over it, and eat with a spoon like cereal. Some families would add honey or sugar when available for extra sweetness, transforming this survival food into something that felt like a treat. Cornbread in milk was a favorite Great Depression meal, and rice in milk with sugar was another variation that provided similar comfort and nutrition. The dish made use of cornmeal, which was often more available and affordable than wheat flour, especially in the South, where corn was a traditional staple crop. Families would bake cornbread in large batches using cast-iron skillets, then use leftovers throughout the week in various ways. Classic cornbread was made with white cornmeal and buttermilk without added sugar, keeping it rustic and simple. The cornbread would absorb the milk, creating a creamy, porridge-like consistency that was both filling and easy to digest. The combination provided both carbohydrates from the cornmeal and protein from the milk. This meal provided essential nutrients for starting the day, giving families the energy they needed for hard physical work. The combination also offered emotional comfort, the familiar taste of home during uncertain times when everything else seemed to be changing. The warm milk and corn combination created a sense of security and normalcy that was precious during the Depression. The simplicity of this meal meant that even children could prepare it themselves, making it perfect for families where parents were working long hours or searching for employment. Peanut butter bread, the protein innovation. During the Depression, eggs, milk, and butter were expensive luxuries, making peanut butter bread an easy, protein-rich solution that required none of these costly ingredients. This bread represented innovation born from necessity, showing how families could create nutritious baked goods without traditional ingredients. The Five Roses Cookbook from 1932 featured eggless, milkless, and butterless recipes that were perfect for hard times when every penny had to be stretched. The bread provided substantial protein when meat was completely unaffordable, making it an essential part of Depression-era nutrition. The recipe has a delicious and rich peanut butter flavor that makes an amazing base for different spreads when available. The preparation used peanut butter as both flavoring and fat, creating a tender texture without expensive ingredients like butter or oil. Families could make this bread using basic pantry staples: flour, peanut butter, sugar, and baking powder. The peanut butter provided both protein and fat, essential nutrients that were often lacking in Depression-era diets. The bread was dense and satisfying, providing sustained energy for families doing physical labor. The recipe was forgiving. Even novice bakers could create something edible and nutritious. The bread makes an excellent base with a smear of something sweet, like jam when available, but it was also satisfying eaten plain. The recipe proved that plant-based proteins could replace expensive animal products while still creating food that was genuinely enjoyable. This bread could be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, making it incredibly versatile for families with limited options. The success of peanut butter bread showed how Depression-era families could adapt traditional recipes to work with available ingredients, creating new food traditions that would outlast the economic crisis that created them. Potato pancakes, the breakfast stretcher. Potato pancakes are budget-friendly and super easy to make, requiring only potatoes, eggs, and onion to create a satisfying breakfast or light meal. These pancakes transformed leftover potatoes into something that felt special and indulgent, proving that Depression-era families could create treats from the most basic ingredients. The preparation was simple but required technique to achieve the perfect crispy exterior and tender interior that made these pancakes so satisfying. The pancakes are much better than they sound and create a crispy, golden exterior that gives way to a tender, flavorful interior. The key was removing excess moisture from the grated potatoes to ensure crispy results that wouldn't become soggy. Families would grate potatoes and onions by hand, then squeeze the mixture in clean towels to remove as much water as possible before mixing with beaten eggs. The technique of pressing out moisture was crucial for success. Families learned that wet potatoes would create soggy pancakes that fell apart, while properly dried potatoes would create crispy, golden cakes that held together beautifully. The onions added flavor and helped bind the mixture, while the eggs provided protein and structure. The pancakes were fried in whatever fat was available, creating a crispy crust that sealed in the flavors. The pancakes could be served with whatever was available: applesauce, syrup, or even just salt and pepper. This dish made use of potatoes that might otherwise go to waste, turning them into a special treat that felt indulgent despite its humble ingredients. The combination of crispy exterior and tender interior created textural interest that made simple ingredients feel special and satisfying. This recipe showed how Depression-era families could transform leftovers into something that felt like a treat, proving that creativity and technique could elevate even the most basic ingredients into something truly enjoyable. Tomato soup cake, the surprising sweet. The tomato soup cake was quite possibly the most incredible invention of the Depression era, as few would associate a savory soup with a sweet treat. This cake represented the ultimate in Depression-era resourcefulness, using savory ingredients to create dessert when traditional baking ingredients were too expensive or unavailable. The cake used Campbell's tomato soup in place of oil and eggs, creating a moist and flavorful dessert that satisfied sweet cravings without costly ingredients. The soup provided both moisture and acidity, essential for proper cake structure and texture. Families discovered that the tomato flavor was completely masked by spices and sugar, creating a chocolate-like depth that was surprisingly delicious. Campbell's actually advertised the tomato soup cake recipe in their promotional materials, recognizing that this innovation could help families create treats during hard times. The cake could be made with basic pantry ingredients when eggs and butter were too expensive for most families. The soup's salt content enhanced the sweet flavors, creating a complex taste profile that was far more sophisticated than its humble ingredients suggested. The acidity in the tomatoes helped activate the leavening agents, creating a light, tender cake that rivaled more expensive versions made with traditional ingredients. The preparation was simple enough for even inexperienced bakers to manage successfully. The cake was mixed like any other, with the soup replacing multiple expensive ingredients. The result was a moist, flavorful cake that could be served plain or with simple frosting when sugar was available. The cake kept well, making it perfect for families who needed desserts that would last several days. This recipe proved that Depression-era cooks were willing to experiment with the most unconventional ingredients to create treats for their families, showing that creativity and determination could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Stuffed peppers, the necessity, innovation. Bell peppers stuffed with beef and rice had roots traced back to the Great Depression, when farmers first began selling unripe peppers out of necessity. This dish turned agricultural necessity into culinary tradition, showing how economic hardship could create new food traditions that would outlast their difficult origins. Farmers discovered that unripe green peppers could be sold when ripe peppers were damaged by weather or pests, creating a new market for previously unmarketable produce. Stuffing made use of whatever grains and meat were available, stretching expensive protein with filling starches. Families would mix rice or breadcrumbs with small amounts of ground meat, creating a filling that was both nutritious and economical. Americans did what they always did when faced with a new variety of food. They stuffed meat in it, creating a dish that was both familiar and innovative. The peppers provided vitamins, particularly vitamin C, while the stuffing offered calories and protein essential for sustaining families through hard times. The dish could be adapted based on what was available in the pantry. Rice, barley, or even leftover bread could form the base of the stuffing. Families would add whatever vegetables they had available, creating variations that kept the dish interesting. The cooking method was simple but effective. The peppers were hollowed out and filled with the meat and grain mixture, then baked until the peppers were tender and the filling was heated through. The pepper's natural sweetness complemented the savory filling, creating a balanced flavor that satisfied both hunger and the desire for something special. This recipe showed how Depression-era cooks could transform agricultural surplus into satisfying family meals, proving that necessity could create innovations that would become beloved traditions, lasting long after the economic crisis had passed. Oat rolls, the grandmother's enterprise. These fluffy oat rolls were made by a grandmother who, during the Depression, had 5 children and not much income, so she made bread and rolls to sell to supplement family income. This recipe represented both survival and enterprise during hard times, showing how families could turn their cooking skills into income streams that helped them survive. The grandmother would get up early in the morning to make loaves of bread and rolls to sell, keeping the family going through determination and skill. The oats provided nutrition and helped stretch expensive wheat flour, making the rolls both economical and nutritious. The rolls were hearty and filling, perfect for working families who needed sustaining food that would provide energy for long days of physical labor. The recipe showed how families could turn cooking skills into income during economic hardship, proving that resourcefulness extended beyond just feeding one's own family. Oats were often more available and cheaper than wheat flour, especially in rural areas where oats were grown locally. The grandmother's enterprise demonstrated the entrepreneurial spirit that helped families survive the Depression, showing how traditional skills could become sources of income. The rolls required basic ingredients: oats, flour, yeast, and water, but the skill was in the technique and timing that created light, fluffy results. The baking process required patience and understanding of how oats affected the dough's texture and rising time. The grandmother would start before dawn, mixing dough that needed time to rise properly. The oats absorbed moisture differently than wheat flour, requiring adjustments to liquid ratios and kneading techniques. The final product was rolls that were both filling and nutritious, providing sustained energy that families needed. These rolls provided both immediate nourishment and a source of income, proving that food could be both sustenance and salvation. The grandmother's success showed how Depression-era families could create their own economic opportunities through skill, determination, and hard work, turning necessity into enterprise and survival into success. Goulash, the stretching strategy. Goulash is a macaroni dish filled with ground beef and tomatoes, hearty and delicious, that starts on the stove and finishes in the oven. This dish represented the Depression-era strategy of stretching expensive meat with pasta and vegetables, creating meals that could feed large families from small amounts of protein. The recipe is super comforting, and the leftovers are especially tasty, making it perfect for families who needed meals that would provide multiple servings from one cooking session. The preparation involved browning small amounts of ground beef first, building a foundation of flavor before adding pasta and tomatoes to create a filling meal. The dish used ground beef, macaroni, and lots of tomatoes for a delicious and comforting meal that was budget-friendly. The key was using just enough meat to provide flavor while relying on pasta and vegetables to create bulk and substance. Families would add whatever vegetables were available: onions, peppers, corn, or beans. stretching the dish even further while adding nutrition and flavor. The dish could be stretched with additional pasta or vegetables based on how many people needed feeding. Tomato sauce and diced tomatoes were seasoned and added to browned ground beef and onions, with cooked macaroni and shredded cheese added before serving. The cooking method was crucial for developing flavor. The meat was browned first to create deep, rich flavors through the Maillard reaction. The tomatoes were added next, creating a sauce that would coat the pasta and carry the meat flavor throughout the dish. The pasta was cooked separately, then combined with the meat mixture and baked until heated through and slightly crispy on top. This one-pot meal provided complete nutrition while using minimal meat, proving that Depression-era families could create satisfying meals through technique and creativity rather than expensive ingredients. Lima bean soup, the protein powerhouse. Lima bean soup was flavored with ham bone, providing a hearty and budget-friendly meal that could be stretched to feed many people. This soup represented the Depression-era understanding of protein combining and food value, showing how families could create complete nutrition from simple ingredients. The soup could be doubled by adding more vegetables and broth to magically increase servings, making it perfect for feeding unexpected guests or larger families. The preparation began with a ham bone, which provided flavor and some protein, while being much more affordable than fresh meat. The soup used a ham bone for distinct meaty flavor throughout, creating a rich broth that made the beans taste like a luxury meal. Families would simmer the bone for hours, extracting every bit of flavor and nutrition from what was essentially a waste product from more expensive cuts. The lima beans provided substantial protein and fiber, making the soup filling and nutritious enough to sustain families through hard physical work. The beans were soaked overnight to reduce cooking time and improve digestibility, then simmered slowly until they became creamy and tender. The long cooking process broke down the beans partially, creating a thick, satisfying soup that felt substantial and filling. This soup could be made in large batches and stretched with additional vegetables or water as needed. Smart families would add carrots, onions, and celery when available, creating a more complex flavor profile while adding vitamins and minerals. The combination of beans and ham created complete proteins, essential for growing children and adults doing physical labor. The recipe showed how Depression-era cooks could create satisfying meals from minimal ingredients while maximizing nutritional value, proving that proper technique could transform humble ingredients into something truly nourishing and delicious. Saltine tomato cakes, the cracker innovation. These crispy golden cakes were made from crushed saltines, chopped onions, and diced tomatoes, all fried in oil until golden and delicious. This dish transformed common pantry staples into a satisfying meal, showing how Depression-era families could create something special from ingredients that most households had available. The recipe was described as tasty and cheap, and represented the innovative cooking that came from the Great Depression. The preparation required crushing saltine crackers and mixing them with vegetables to create a batter that would hold together when fried. The tomatoes provided moisture and acidity, while the crackers gave structure and substance. The onions added flavor and helped bind the mixture, creating cakes that were both crispy and tender. The mixture was formed into patties and fried in a little oil until crispy and golden brown. This technique showed how Depression-era cooks could create texture and flavor from the simplest ingredients. The crackers absorbed the tomato juices while maintaining enough structure to create proper cakes. The frying process created a crispy exterior that contrasted beautifully with the tender interior, making these simple ingredients feel like a proper meal rather than just survival food. The cakes provided carbohydrates and vegetables in one dish, making them suitable as either a side dish or light meal depending on what else was available. They could be served with eggs when available, or eaten alone as a filling snack. The recipe was infinitely adaptable. Families could add whatever vegetables they had available, creating variations that kept the dish interesting. This recipe proved that creativity could transform the most basic pantry staples into something genuinely enjoyable, showing that Depression-era families could create satisfaction and pleasure from even the humblest ingredients through skill and imagination. Leek and potato soup, the creamy comfort. This velvety soup was made without cream or butter by a grandmother as a cost-effective meal during the Great Depression. The soup achieved richness through technique rather than expensive ingredients, proving that proper cooking methods could create luxurious textures from simple vegetables. Each bite was studded with creamy potatoes, savory leeks, and flavorful garlic, creating a soup that felt indulgent despite its humble origins. The preparation involved slowly cooking leeks until they became sweet and tender, developing deep flavors that formed the foundation of the soup. The leeks were cleaned carefully to remove all dirt and sand, then sliced thin and cooked until they practically melted into the soup base. This slow cooking process was crucial for developing the sweet, complex flavors that made the soup special. The potatoes were crucial for creating the soup's creamy texture without any dairy products. The soup was created by a user's grandmother specifically as a cost-effective meal during the Depression, showing how families could create comfort food without expensive ingredients. The potatoes broke down partially during cooking, releasing starch that naturally thickened the soup and created a creamy, satisfying texture. The leeks provided subtle onion flavor that was more refined than regular onions, while the potatoes gave body and nutrition. The soup could be made entirely with vegetables, making it suitable for families who couldn't afford meat or dairy. The technique of slow cooking and proper seasoning created rich, satisfying flavors using only vegetables and careful attention to cooking methods. This recipe demonstrated how Depression-era cooks could create rich, satisfying flavors using only vegetables and careful technique, proving that luxury wasn't about expensive ingredients, but about skill, patience, and understanding how to coax maximum flavor from simple components. Cauliflower Bolognese, the meatless marvel. This recipe recreated the hearty texture of Bolognese with coarsely chopped cauliflower and sweet onions, proving that vegetables could satisfy even the most devoted meat-eaters. This dish represented the Depression-era innovation of replacing meat with vegetables while maintaining the satisfying textures and flavors that families craved. The recipe went back to the Great Depression, when a large Italian family gathered in the kitchen to find ways to prepare Sunday dinner on a tight budget. The cauliflower provided texture and substance that mimicked ground meat when prepared properly, while the onions added sweetness and depth of flavor. Friends and family couldn't believe there was no ground beef in the sauce, showing how effective this substitution could be when done correctly. The preparation required careful chopping to create the right texture that would fool even experienced palates. The cauliflower was cooked until it broke down slightly, mimicking the texture of ground meat while absorbing the flavors of the sauce. The cooking process was crucial. The cauliflower needed to be chopped to the right size and cooked to the perfect texture to create the illusion of meat. Too much cooking would create mush, while too little would leave obvious vegetable pieces. This recipe showed how Depression-era families could maintain cultural food traditions even when traditional ingredients were unavailable. The Italian family's determination to create their traditional Sunday dinner, despite economic hardship, resulted in a recipe that was both innovative and delicious. The dish proved that vegetables could be prepared to satisfy even the most devoted meat-eaters. The success of this recipe demonstrated that Depression-era creativity could transcend economic necessity, creating dishes that were genuinely delicious rather than just nutritionally adequate, showing that families could maintain food traditions and enjoyment even during the hardest times. These 25 recipes represent more than just Depression-era cooking. They embody the American spirit of resilience, innovation, and determination in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. Though the economic hardships of the Great Depression eventually passed, its influence on American food culture remains strong, continuing to shape how we think about resourcefulness, waste, and the true value of food. Each recipe tells a story of families who refused to give up, who found ways to transform scarcity into abundance through creativity, skill, and unwavering determination to survive and thrive. Many of the survival techniques developed during the 1930s, home canning, nose-to-tail eating, waste-free cooking, and community sharing, continue to be valued today, particularly during times of economic uncertainty. These recipes remind us that food is more than mere sustenance. It represents hope, community, family traditions, and the proof that human ingenuity can overcome even the darkest times in our history. The lessons embedded in these recipes extend far beyond cooking techniques. They teach us about resourcefulness, creativity, community cooperation, and the importance of never wasting anything that could provide nourishment. They show us how families worked together, shared knowledge and resources, and found ways to create joy and comfort even when everything seemed hopeless. When we cook these dishes today, we honor the memory of those who created them and carry forward their lessons of resourcefulness and resilience. We connect with a generation that understood the true value of food and the importance of community in surviving hardship. These recipes serve as both historical documents and practical guides, showing us that with creativity, determination, and skill, we can overcome any challenge while maintaining our humanity and hope for better times ahead.